What I am about to tell you happened 3 weeks ago, and I have not slept a full night since. And before you decide that what I am describing is the product of sleep deprivation or laboratory stress, or the particular psychological pressure of working alone with the dead at 3 in the morning, I want you to know that I am a scientist, that I have spent 11 years in rigorous academic and professional training that has made skepticism my default setting, that I do not frighten easily, and I do not imagine things, and that the tapping on the glass of my sample rack at 3:14 in the morning in the toxicology laboratory at the Houston Forensic Science Center was real, was physical, was the sound of something making deliberate contact with the borosilicate glass of the sample vials containing the blood of a dead woman, and that I was alone in that laboratory, and that I have the security footage to prove I was alone, and that the security footage does not show what made the tapping sound, and that I have watched that footage 47 times, and the 47th viewing produced the same result as the first, which is that the footage shows me alone in the laboratory at 3:14 in the morning, and that the tapping is audible on the audio track of the footage, and that nothing in the frame is moving except me, and that I am sitting here right now telling you this, because if I do not tell someone, I am going to lose the remaining portion of my mind that the last 3 weeks have left intact. Stay with me through this. What I am going to tell you is going to take some time to build to its full weight, and the building matters. And if you leave before the building is complete, you will not understand what happened in the laboratory at 3:14, and I need you to understand it, not for my sake, though there is that, but because what I found in the blood of the dead woman at 3 in the morning is something that understanding requires a witness, and you are the witness I have, and the story does not end with the tapping. The story ends somewhere that the tapping was only the beginning of, and you need to stay until the end. I am a Toxicology PostDoc Fellow at the Houston Forensic Science Center, which is a position that means I have completed a PhD in analytical chemistry with a toxicology specialization and am now in the 2-year research and training period that bridges the academic credential and the professional forensic certification, doing the work of a forensic toxicologist under the supervision of a credentialed forensic toxicologist, which in practice means I do the work and my supervisor reviews my findings, which in further practice means that on the overnight shift, which I have been assigned to for 7 months, I am the forensic toxicologist. I am the person running the analyses. I am the person whose findings will go into the report that goes to the medical examiner, that goes to the district attorney, that goes into the court record that determines what the official record says about how a person died. The weight of that is not something that reduces with familiarity. The weight of that is with me every night I sit down at the analytical workstation and open a case file and begin the process of asking the chemistry what the circumstances of a death could not tell anyone by observation alone. The Houston Forensic Science Center is a modern facility, glass and steel, and the specific institutional cleanliness of a place where contamination is an active enemy, where the floors are a specific grade of sealed concrete and the surfaces are a specific grade of non-porous material, and the air is HEPA filtered and exchanged at a rate that keeps the particulate count at a level appropriate for analytical work. It is a beautiful facility in the way that precision environments are beautiful. The beauty of a place where every element has been selected for its function and where the function is the pursuit of exactness, of certainty, of the kind of truth that chemistry provides, which is the best kind of truth available in forensic work because chemistry does not have a motive and does not have a memory and does not have the 100 cognitive biases that make human testimony unreliable. Chemistry tells you what is there. My job is to read what it tells me. The overnight shift at the toxicology laboratory is not a shift that my supervisor works. My supervisor, a board-certified forensic toxicologist named Dr. Hargrove, who has been in this work for 22 years, works a standard day shift schedule, which means that from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. the laboratory is my responsibility, which means that from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I am the most qualified person in the building for the specific analytical work that happens in this laboratory, which means that from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., in the specific way that expertise in a specialized field produces a specific kind of aloneness. I am alone. Not literally alone in the building. The building has overnight security and a facilities staff member on call, but alone in the way that matters for the work, alone in the laboratory, alone with the samples, alone with the instruments and the chemistry and the cases. The cases come from multiple sources. From the medical examiner's office, from law enforcement agencies, from the hospital system in cases where drug toxicity is suspected, from insurance investigations, from defense attorneys in some cases, from the variety of institutional contexts in which knowing what was in a person's blood at the time of their death is relevant to the official determination of what happened to them. Each case arrives with a case number and a set of biological samples, typically blood, urine, vitreous humor from the eye, and sometimes tissue samples depending on the circumstances and the post-mortem interval, and with a request form specifying what the requesting agency wants to know, which ranges from the basic drug panel screening to highly specific targeted analyses for particular compounds that the circumstances of the death have suggested might be relevant. The unwritten rules of forensic toxicology night work are not rules I was given by anyone. They are rules I have developed across 7 months of overnight shifts in the specific environment of a forensic toxicology laboratory, and I am going to tell you what they are because they matter for the story. The first rule is chain of custody above everything. Every sample that enters this laboratory has a chain of custody record that documents every person who has handled it, every container it has been in, every instrument it has passed through, every result that has been generated from it. And the chain of custody is the legal backbone of the work, is the thing that makes the results admissible in court. And the chain of custody is maintained with an absoluteness that overrides every other consideration. If a chain of custody cannot be maintained, the sample is not analyzed, the work stops, the case is held until the documentation can be established. This is the first rule. The second rule is about the samples themselves, about the relationship you develop with them when you work with them alone at 3 in the morning. And this rule is not analytical, but psychological. And it is the rule that the experienced forensic laboratory workers convey to new workers in the specific, quiet way that psychological rules are conveyed in professional environments, which is without drama and without elaboration, just the information itself. The rule is that the samples are not abstract. The samples are the biological remnant of a person who existed in the world and who no longer exists in the world. And the work you are doing with the samples is the closest thing to speaking to that person that science allows. And the results you generate from the samples are the last testimony that person will give, and you treat them accordingly. Not with reverence in a religious sense, but with the specific seriousness of someone who understands that they are handling a person's last words and that the handling matters. The third rule, the one I had to develop myself because no one told me it, because it belongs to a category of experience that the training does not prepare you for, is this. At 3 in the morning in a forensic toxicology laboratory, when the instruments are running and the building is quiet and you have been alone for 4 hours with the blood and tissue of people who died under circumstances that required forensic investigation, the silence has a quality that ordinary silence does not have. It is the silence of a space that has absorbed the weight of what happens in it, the accumulating weight of 7 months of overnight shifts with the dead's blood. And in that silence, if you are paying the wrong kind of attention or the right kind, depending on your perspective, you become aware of the samples as more than samples. You become aware of the case files as more than documentation. You become aware of the specific fact that you are connected through the chemistry to the person who no longer exists, and the connection is real, is molecular, is the actual biology of a person distributed into the vials in your sample rack. And at 3 in the morning, that fact has a weight that daytime chemistry does not carry. The case that produced the tapping came in on a Tuesday. Case number HF 2024-09847. A female decedent, age 34, name withheld from the laboratory per protocol. found deceased in her apartment in the Memorial Park area of Houston. Death reported as unattended, circumstances unknown. Medical examiner requesting full toxicology panel plus targeted analysis for anticoagulants and cardiac glycosides based on the circumstances of the discovery, which I know from the case notes were unusual in a way that the case notes describe as inconsistent with natural death, but without evidence sufficient for immediate homicide classification, which is the language that means something is wrong, but nothing can be proven yet, and the toxicology is the thing that might change that. I received the case at 11:47 p.m. on the Tuesday night, and I begin the preparation protocol, the logging and the accessioning and the sample preparation that precedes any analytical work, and by 1:30 in the morning I have the sample set prepared and the initial screening assays running, and I am at my desk reviewing the case file information that has been provided, which is the summary of circumstances from the medical examiner's report, which I am reading at 1:30 in the morning in the laboratory, and which is making the second rule. The rule about the samples not being abstract, more present than it usually is, because the circumstances of the death of the woman whose blood is in my sample rack are circumstances that do not read as natural, that do not read as accidental, that read as the circumstances of a woman who was managed toward death by someone who understood something about pharmacology, about the specific interactions of drugs that in isolation are therapeutic and in combination are lethal, and the reading of those circumstances at 1:30 in the morning with the woman's blood in the sample rack is the beginning of the weight that I carry into 3:14. The targeted analysis for cardiac glycosides runs on the liquid chromatography mass spectrometry instrument, the LCMS, which is the workhorse of the forensic toxicology laboratory for this category of compound, an instrument of extraordinary sensitivity and specificity that can detect and identify compounds at concentrations measured in nanograms per milliliter, billionths of a gram in a milliliter of blood, and that does so through the specific mass-to-charge ratios of compound fragments, a chemical fingerprint that is as specific as a human fingerprint and considerably more reliable. The LCMS runs its analysis over a period of approximately 45 minutes per sample, and I have set up the queue and the analysis is running, and I am at my desk at 3:08 in the morning reviewing the preliminary results from the screening assays, and the preliminary results are telling me something that the circumstances in the case file were suggesting, which is that the combination of compounds in this woman's blood is a combination that does not occur by accident, that requires knowledge to produce. That is the pharmacological signature of someone who understood what they were doing, and I am at my desk at 3:08 in the morning understanding that I am building the toxicological case for what will likely be classified as a homicide, and the woman's blood is in the sample rack on the instrument bench 6 feet from my desk, and the LCMS is running its analysis, and the laboratory is in its 3 a.m. silence. The tapping begins at 3:14. I hear it before I understand what it is, the way you hear an unexpected sound in a quiet environment before your brain has categorized it, and then the categorization arrives, and the categorization is tapping, is the specific sound of a hard object making light contact with a glass surface, and the sound is coming from the instrument bench, from the sample rack, from the location of the vials containing the blood of the woman whose death I am in the process of proving was not an accident. I look up from my desk. The instrument bench is in my line of sight, 6 feet away, fully illuminated by the laboratory bench lighting, and I can see the sample rack and the vials in it, and nothing is touching the vials, and the tapping is happening. 3 taps, a brief pause, 3 taps, a pause, the same interval, the same 3-tap pattern, the same quality of contact, glass being tapped from outside the vial, and I am looking at the vials while the tapping happens, and nothing is touching them. I get up. I walk to the bench. I stand over the sample rack, and I look at the vials from 18 inches above them, and the tapping is happening, and I can feel it now, can feel the faint vibration in the bench surface under my hands when the taps occur, which means the tapping is physically real, and is being transmitted through the bench and is happening, and I am looking at the vials from 18 inches and there is nothing contacting them. I put my gloved hand next to the rack and I wait for the next 3-tap sequence, and it occurs, and the vibration is in the bench under my palm, and it is not my hand, not my heartbeat, not any biological vibration from my own body, and it is 3 distinct taps on the glass of the vials, and I am standing over the rack watching, and there is nothing there. I do what a scientist does. I eliminate possibilities. I check the ventilation system, the bench-mounted HEPA unit that circulates air through the work area, for a vibration pattern that could be transmitting to the sample rack. The vibration pattern of the HEPA unit is continuous, not periodic, not 3-tap pause, and I put my hand on the HEPA housing, and the HEPA housing vibrates continuously at its fan frequency, and the sample rack taps in 3s. I check the LCMS instrument for a mechanical vibration in its operating cycle that could be transmitting to the bench. The LCMS runs a pump cycle that has a frequency, and I measure the frequency with my phone's vibration analyzer app, and the LCMS pump frequency is 4.7 Hz, and the tapping interval is approximately 1 tap per 1.3 seconds, which is 0.77 Hz, and they are not the same, and they do not match, and the tapping is not the LCMS. I run through every other source, every instrument on the bench, every piece of equipment in the laboratory, every HVAC component, and every structural element, and every possible source of a periodic mechanical vibration that could produce 3 taps on glass at 1.3-second intervals, and I eliminate every one of them. And I stand at the bench with the tapping continuing at its 3-tap interval, and the sample rack in front of me, and the blood in the vials of the woman whose death I am proving was deliberate, and I have no explanation. I pull up the security footage on my workstation. The laboratory has 4 cameras, 1 in each corner, full coverage, and the footage from all 4 cameras for the 14-minute period from 3:07 to 3:21. Which I review 3 times in sequence that night and 44 times since, shows me in the laboratory, shows the sample rack on the instrument bench, shows the sample rack from 2 camera angles simultaneously, and shows the tapping occurring, audible on the audio track, and shows the sample rack receiving the tapping, the vials vibrating slightly in the rack with each set of 3, and shows nothing touching them. Nothing. For camera angles, 14 minutes, full coverage of the laboratory, and the tapping has no source in any image from any camera. The LCMS analysis completes at 3:52. The results confirm what the preliminary screening suggested, confirm it with the specificity and the certainty that the LCMS provides, confirm the presence of compounds in the dead woman's blood at concentrations and in combinations that constitute, in the language of forensic toxicology, evidence of deliberate poisoning. I write the preliminary findings into the case management system, flag the case for immediate review by Dr. Hargrove in the morning, and attach the note that this case requires expedited reporting to law enforcement. I complete the chain of custody documentation. I secure the samples. I sit at my desk for a long time before I go home. The tapping stopped at 3:21. It stopped as abruptly as it started, mid-interval, not at the completion of a 3-tap sequence, but in the middle of 1, 2 taps, and then silence. And the silence after it was different from the silence before it. Not the weighted silence of the 3 a.m. laboratory, but a lighter silence. A released silence. The silence of something that was present and is no longer. And I sat at my bench in that silence for 11 minutes before I moved. The case was classified as a homicide 6 days after my report. A suspect was identified within 2 weeks. I am told the toxicology findings are central to the prosecution's case. I am told the trial date is set. I have not been back to the laboratory on overnight shift since the night of the tapping because I requested a temporary schedule modification, and the modification was granted without explanation required because Dr. Hargrove, who has been in this work for 22 years, looked at me when I made the request and said, "Take the days you need," and looked at me in the way of someone who has been in this laboratory for 22 years and who did not ask me to explain the request because he did not need the explanation. He knew. He has been in the laboratory for 22 years on nights that I was not there, and he knew. And he said, take the days you need, and I took them. And I am going back next week, and I will sit at the bench and I will run the analyses and I will read what the chemistry tells me about how people died, and I will do the work, and I will be alone with the blood at 3 in the morning, and I will listen, because the tapping was not a malfunction and was not an artifact and was not the production of a stressed and sleep-deprived mind. And the woman in case HF 2024-09847 had something she needed the chemistry to say, and the chemistry said it, and I heard it, and the trial date is set, and whatever needed to tap on the glass at 3:14 in the morning until I understood what I was looking at can rest, and I hope it does, and I go back next week, and I will listen, because this is the work, and the work is listening to what the dead are trying to tell us, and sometimes they tell us directly, and I am not going to pretend that that is not what happened, because I am a scientist, and the evidence is the evidence, and the evidence says that something tapped on the glass of those vials at 3:14 in the morning until I understood what I was looking at, and the person who needed me to understand is going to get justice, and that is enough. That is more than enough, and I go back next week. Story number 2. Before I tell you what happened in the evidence locker at 4 in the morning, I need you to promise yourself something. Promise yourself that you will stay with this until the end, because what I am going to tell you has a beginning that sounds procedural, and a middle that sounds like it might have an explanation, and an end that does not. And the end is the part that I have been living with for 2 months, and that has changed the way I do this job and the way I think about the objects that pass through this room. And if you leave before the end, you will miss the thing that made me understand something about the evidence locker that 11 years in law enforcement did not prepare me for, and that the last 2 months have made impossible to unknow. I am an evidence specialist at a sheriff's office in a county in East Texas, and the evidence locker that I am going to describe to you is the room that I am in 4 nights a week from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., cataloging and processing and storing the physical objects that law enforcement collects from crime scenes, the things that people leave behind when they commit crimes or when crimes are committed against them, the full material inventory of human violence and loss and the consequences of human choices at their worst. I have been doing this job for 11 years, the last 4 on the overnight shift, and I want to tell you what this job actually is before I tell you what happened in the locker. Because the job is not what people think it is when they think of evidence rooms, which is a storage facility, a passive repository, a room full of bags and boxes waiting to be retrieved. The job is more than that. The job is the active, continuous management of a collection of objects that were present at some of the worst moments in the lives of everyone they are associated with. And the management of that collection is a precise and regulated and highly specific professional discipline. And the person who does it is not a passive custodian, but an active participant in the judicial process. The person who maintains the chain of custody that makes evidence admissible and prosecutions possible and justice achievable. The evidence locker at this facility is a controlled access room in the basement level of the sheriff's office building, approximately 2,000 square feet, climate-controlled, with a heavy steel access door that requires keycard and PIN entry, monitored by 4 cameras, lit by fluorescent overhead lighting that runs the full length of the room on 3 circuits. The room is organized by case number into numbered shelving units and secure lockers of various sizes, with a processing bench along one wall where new evidence intake is performed, where items are logged and packaged and labeled and photographed before going to their assigned storage location. The room smells of the specific combination of institutional cleaning products and the accumulated scent of the items stored in it, a smell that is difficult to describe precisely, but that anyone who has spent time in an evidence room knows immediately. The smell of packaged materials and old paper, and something underneath both of those, that is the smell of the events that produce the items, that no amount of bagging or packaging entirely removes. The rules of the evidence locker are formal and informal. The The formal rules are the chain of custody rules, the intake and log and photograph and seal rules, the access log rules, the rules about what can and cannot be removed and by whom and with what documentation. These rules are the rules of the professional discipline, and they are absolute, and they are the rules that keep me employed, and that keep prosecutions intact, and that keep the system functioning the way the system is supposed to function. The informal rules are the rules that the officers and detectives who bring evidence to the locker know and that they convey, in the casual shorthand of law enforcement culture, to new people, including to me on my first week in this role 11 years ago. Conveyed by a woman named Sergeant Aldridge who had been working evidence for 16 years and who had the specific flat effect of a person who has seen a very great deal and has made peace with most of it. The first informal rule that Sergeant Aldridge told me was about the heavy items. She said, when you are processing weapons evidence, firearms and edged weapons and impact weapons from violent crime scenes, you process them last in any given shift. Not first, not in the middle, last. I asked why. She said, because the other items don't bother you as much when you know you're going home soon after. I thought she meant psychological weight, the weight of handling instruments of violence, and she let me think that for about a month before she clarified what she meant, which was not only that. She said the weight in the locker with weapons evidence is not only psychological and is not something she could prove to me, and was not something she expected me to believe until I had spent enough time in the locker to feel it myself. She said I would know what she meant when I knew, and she was right, and I knew within 3 months. And what I knew was that the room feels different when weapons evidence is being processed than it feels at any other time, that the air in the room is different, is heavier, is cooler by a degree or two that the climate control does not account for, and that the difference is most pronounced at night. The second informal rule was about the documentation. She said, write down everything you notice, everything unusual, every sensation or observation that is outside the routine of the intake process. Write it in your personal log, not the case log, your personal log, because the case log is a legal document and legal documents require a specific kind of language, and the specific kind of language does not accommodate the kinds of things that happen in the locker at night. But writing them down is still important. Writing them down keeps them from being only in your head, and keeping them only in your head is what you want to avoid. I asked what kinds of things happen in the locker at night. She looked at me with the flat effect. She said, the kinds of things that happen when you are alone with objects that have been present at the worst moments in people's lives. She said, you will learn the specifics yourself. She was right again. The third informal rule, the one she told me last and quietly, the one that I have thought about almost every night in the locker since, was this. You do not leave items from the same crime scene separated across the room. You keep them together at the same storage location as much as the physical constraints of the storage allow. I asked if this was a cataloging efficiency rule. She said it was not a cataloging rule. She said it was a comfort rule. I said, comfort for whom? She said, for whoever needs it. She said this, and she walked away, and I stood in the locker for a long time thinking about what she meant, and I have been thinking about it for 11 years, and I think I understand now what she meant, and the understanding came specifically from what happened at 4 in the morning 2 months ago. The night of the heavy air began at 11 p.m. with a standard intake shift. I had 3 cases in the intake queue, a DWI evidence package, a theft case evidence package, and a violent assault case evidence package, and I processed them in order, the standard order, leaving the assault case last in accordance with the first informal rule because the assault case included a bladed weapon, a fixed-blade hunting knife recovered from the scene of a serious assault that had resulted in critical injuries to the victim, who as of the case notes date was still hospitalized. The knife had been processed by the crime scene unit, swabbed and photographed at the scene, and had arrived at the locker in a sealed evidence package with the full chain of custody documentation, and I processed it last, at approximately 3:40 in the morning, following the first informal rule. and I noted when I opened the outer evidence bag to complete the documentation photography that the air in the locker changed in the way that Sergeant Aldridge had described, got heavier, got cooler, not dramatically, not the cold of a malfunctioning climate control system. The specific localized cool of the area immediately around the processing bench, and I noted it in my personal log, as the second informal rule requires. And I completed the documentation and sealed the knife in its final storage package and logged it to its assigned locker location and closed the locker door and returned to the processing bench to complete the paperwork. The air did not lighten after the knife was locked away. This had happened before, had happened with other weapons evidence on other nights. The air taking longer to return to its baseline character after particularly significant evidence had been processed. But on most nights, the return happened within 30 minutes, and I had stopped noticing it by the time the paperwork was done. On this night, at 4:15 in the morning, with the knife locked and the paperwork nearly complete, the air at the processing bench was still heavy and still cool and had acquired something additional, something that I noticed and noted in my personal log as a directional quality, meaning the heaviness had a direction to it, was coming from a specific location in the room rather than from everywhere at once. And the direction was the bank of lockers on the east wall where the knife was stored, and specifically the locker where the knife was stored, and the direction of it was as specific as the direction of a sound from a speaker, unmistakable, oriented, coming from the knife's location in the way that a draft comes from the location of a gap in a window. Except that the climate control system shows no fault and the locker seals are intact, and there is no source for a directional air movement from a closed locker in a controlled environment. I sit at the processing bench and I look at the east wall. The east wall has 24 lockers, 4 rows of 6, the knife in locker 17, the second row from the top, 4th from the left, and I look at locker 17, and the locker is a standard steel evidence locker with a key lock and a case number placard in the slot on the door, and it looks like every other locker on the wall, and the air coming from its direction is heavy and cold. I finish the paperwork. I stand up. I do the thing that the informal rules do not specifically prohibit, but that I have never done before on an overnight shift, which is to walk to locker 17 and put my hand flat on the locker door. The locker door is cold, not the ambient temperature of a climate-controlled room, which runs at 68 degrees, and not the cold of metal that has been in a cool room, which is a few degrees below ambient at most. The door of locker 17 is cold in the way that a surface is cold when it has been in contact with something that is significantly below ambient temperature. Cold in the way that the exterior of a refrigerator is cold when it is working hard. And I press my hand flat on the door, and the cold is through my palm and into my wrist, and I hold my hand there for a slow count of 10, and I take my hand away. I look at the access log for locker 17. The access log shows 2 entries, my intake at 3:47 and the assignment to this locker at 3:51. No other entries. The locker has been opened twice tonight, both times by me, and has not been opened before tonight. The case that the knife belongs to was opened 2 days ago, meaning the knife has not been in this building before tonight. The locker 17 cold has no source in the locker's history at this facility. I sit in the chair at the processing bench for a long time, looking at locker 17, and I think about the second informal rule, about writing down what you notice, and I write in my personal log the temperature observation, the directional air quality, the duration, the locker number, the case number. I write everything I noticed, and I sit with what I have written, and the room is heavy around me, and locker 17 is cold on the wall, and the victim of the assault that produced the knife in locker 17 is in a hospital in this county in a condition that the case notes describe as critical, and I am sitting in the locker at 4:30 in the morning with the specific understanding that is arriving in me slowly. The understanding that Sergeant Aldridge's third informal rule was about. The comfort rule, the rule about keeping items from the same crime scene together for whoever needs it. The knife is alone in locker 17. The rest of the assault case evidence, the victim's clothing, The other items recovered from the scene are in the shelf unit at the far end of the room, 2 shelving units away, separated from the knife by the full length of the east wall and the cross aisle. I separated them on intake without thinking about it, assigning the knife to the secure locker and the other items to the shelf unit, the standard practice for categorizing weapons separately from other evidence. The procedurally correct practice, the practice that Sergeant Aldridge's third informal rule was suggesting I reconsider. I get up. I pull the shelf unit items for the assault case. I pull them carefully, maintaining the chain of custody documentation for each movement, logging each item's transfer in the case log with the procedural language that the case log requires, and I carry them to the east wall, and I assign them to the lockers adjacent to Locker 17, Locker 16, and Locker 18, and I log the assignments. And I put the items in their new lockers, and I close the doors and I stand in front of the east wall, with Lockers 16, 17, and 18 now, containing all of the assault case evidence together. The air in the room lightens. Not immediately. Over approximately 4 minutes, starting from when I closed the door of Locker 18, the heaviness in the air at the processing bench and in the room around it reduces, and the directional quality from Locker 17 reduces, and the temperature of the room returns to its climate-controlled 68 degrees. I put my hand on the door of Locker 17 at 4:42 in the morning, and it is 68 degrees, ambient, the temperature of a steel door in a controlled environment. And the room is what the room is supposed to be, and the air is the air of an evidence locker at 4:42 in the morning, which is exactly what I know it to be from 11 years and 4 overnight years in the accumulated experience of this specific room. I sit in the chair at the processing bench for another 20 minutes before I begin the next task. In those 20 minutes, I write in my personal log. I write what I observed and what I did and what the room did in response, and I write the third informal rule, and I write Sergeant Aldridge's name, and I write, "She was right." And I write the date and the time, and I close the log, and I sit in the evidence locker at 5 in the morning in the specific silence of a room that has returned to its baseline character, and I think about the victim in the hospital, and I think about the knife in Locker 17, and I think about Sergeant Aldridge saying, "Comfort rule for whoever needs it," and I think I understand. I think I have understood since 4:42 in the morning when I put my hand on the door of Locker 17, and it was 68 degrees. I understand what she meant, and I keep the cases together now. Always, every intake, every assignment, I keep them together, and the locker is what it should be, and the air is what it should be, and I write everything down. And I go home in the morning, and I come back the next night, and I keep things together, and the room is quieter for it, and that is enough. That is the job, and I do it, and I will keep doing it. And Sergeant Aldridge was right about all 3 rules, and I should have understood the third one sooner, and I understand it now. And the victim of the assault was discharged from the hospital 6 weeks after that night, and I know this because I checked. Because the case is in my locker, and the case matters, and the people in the case matter, and I check. And she went home, and the knife is in Locker 17, and the room is 68 degrees, and everything that needs to be together is together, and the air is light. Story number 3. I need you to understand something before I tell you what I found on the hard drive at 2 in the morning, because what I found is something that I have shown to 2 other people since that night. 2 people whose professional judgment I trust completely, and both of them gave me the same response, which was silence followed by a rational explanation that neither of them believed. And I know they did not believe it because I know these people, and I know what their believing looks like and what their not believing looks like. And what they produced was not believing dressed in the language of believing. And I accepted it because the alternative to accepting it is to accept what I found on the hard drive. And I have been trying to accept what I found on the hard drive for 6 weeks, and I am going to tell you what it was, and you are going to stay until the end of this. Because this is not the kind of story that is bearable in the middle. I am a digital forensic examiner at a law enforcement agency in Orlando, Florida, and my job is to recover and analyze digital evidence from electronic devices that have been collected in criminal investigations, And the work I do at 2 in the morning in the digital forensics laboratory is the work of going into the places where people hide things on their devices and finding what is hidden, which is a specific and highly technical forensic discipline that requires both the analytical skills of a computer scientist and the investigative instincts of a detective, and that produces, over years of practice, a specific kind of knowledge about the relationship between people and their devices, about what people store digitally and how they store it, and what they think they are hiding when they delete files, and why deletion, as any digital forensic examiner knows, is almost never the permanent erasure that people believe it to be. The digital forensics laboratory at my facility is a controlled access room on the second floor of the building, separate from the evidence locker, separate from the investigative offices, a room that contains the examination workstations and the right-blocked imaging equipment and the forensic analysis software and the storage infrastructure that supports the examination of digital evidence. The room is small by the standards of the facility, approximately 800 square feet, and it is my room in the way that specialized rooms belong to the specialists who work in them, and I am the night shift specialist, which means that from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. the laboratory is mine, which means that I am alone in this room with the devices and the data and the things people put on their devices that they believed they had successfully concealed. I want to tell you the rules of this work before I tell you what I found, because the rules shape the finding, and the finding cannot be understood without the rules. The formal rules of digital forensic examination are the rules of evidence handling and chain of custody and forensic soundness, the rules that govern how a device is acquired and how data is extracted from it, and how the extracted data is analyzed and documented, all of it in a manner that preserves the admissibility of the evidence in court. Every action taken with a device is documented. Every tool used is documented. Every finding is documented, and the documentation is what transforms the work from a technical exercise into legal evidence. These are the rules that govern every case I work, that govern the hard drive I was working on at 2 in the morning, that govern everything. The informal rules, the rules that the senior digital forensic examiners at this facility and at every digital forensics facility I have worked to convey to new examiners, are fewer and simpler and delivered with less elaboration than the formal rules because they do not require elaboration. The first is about the content. In digital forensic examination, you encounter content that human beings have produced and stored on their devices, and the full range of what human beings produce and store on their devices is the full range of human behavior at its most documented and unguarded, which means the worst of it and the best of it, and all of the gradations in between. And you encounter it at all hours and in all conditions, and sometimes alone at 2 in the morning, and the first rule is that you document what you find without becoming the content, which is the language that senior examiners use for the state of psychological detachment that the work requires, the state in which you are a scientist examining data and not a person responding to the human weight of what the data contains. Becoming the content is what happens when the detachment fails, and the content you can become varies by case and by examiner and by the hour of the night and the cumulative weight of the previous cases, and avoiding it is the most important psychological skill of this work. The second rule is the documentation rule extended into a specific practice. Before you begin examining any device, you document your workstation, you document the laboratory, you document your position and your tools and the state of the examination environment, because the chain of custody of the examination environment is as important as the chain of custody of the device. And the documentation of the environment at the start of the examination is the baseline against which everything that follows is measured. This rule is in the formal training. The informal version of the rule adds one thing. You document the environment at the start and you document it at the end, and you compare the two. And if there is a discrepancy, you report it. I have followed this rule for 6 years. The comparison has never produced a discrepancy that I could not account for, until the night I am going to tell you about. The third rule, The one that I am telling you last, because it is the one that is the most directly relevant to what I found, is the rule about the files you do not expect. In digital forensic examination, you go into a device expecting to find what the investigative context suggests you will find, and you find it. Or you find that it was deleted, or you find that the device does not contain what the investigation expected, any of which outcomes is a forensic finding with evidentiary significance. What you also sometimes find, in the carved and unallocated space of a device's storage, in the areas where deleted files exist as recoverable data between the file system's accounting of them and their eventual overwriting by new data, what you find in that space is things that the device's user did not intend to create. Files that are the artifacts of software processes or system operations that produce data incidentally to their primary function. Files that are not the user's deliberate creations, but that exist on the device, and that the forensic recovery tools surface along with everything else. These files are usually artifacts, are usually meaningless from an evidentiary perspective, are system logs and temporary files, and the debris of software operation. Usually. The third rule says, when you recover a file you cannot account for, you document it before you do anything else, before you open it or analyze it or draw any conclusion about it, because the documentation of its recovery state and its metadata and its location in the storage structure is the foundation of whatever its evidentiary significance turns out to be. Document first. Always. The hard drive I am working with at 2 in the morning is a standard consumer hard drive removed from a personal computer that has been submitted as part of an ongoing investigation, the nature of which I am not going to describe beyond saying that it involves a category of crime that produces, in the digital forensic examination, a specific expectation of what the device contains. And that expectation has been partially confirmed by the examination up to the point of the finding. I am in the analysis phase, working through the recovered files that the forensic imaging and recovery process has surfaced, reviewing and categorizing and flagging relevant items for the case documentation, and I am working efficiently and methodically through the file categories in the order that the forensic workflow specifies, and I am in the video file category when I find the file I am going to describe. The file is in the unallocated space of the drive, meaning it was deleted and has been recovered by the forensic tools. Its metadata, the data about the file itself rather than the data that the file contains, shows a creation date of 6 days ago, a file size of 2.4 gigabytes, which is consistent with a high-definition video of approximately 20 minutes duration, and a file name that has been partially overwritten by the deletion process, showing only a fragment of the original name, which the recovery tool displays as a string of characters that I look at, and that I look at again, and that I sit with for a moment before I open the file, because the characters that are visible in the recovered file name fragment include what appears to be a floor number and a room designation that I recognize, that I should not be able to recognize in a file recovered from a personal hard drive that was collected in an unrelated investigation, that I recognize because the floor number and the room designation are the floor number and the room designation of this laboratory. I follow the third rule. Before I open the file, I document its recovery state, its location in the unallocated space, its metadata, its file name fragment, everything, the full documentation that the rule requires. And I do this carefully and completely, and with the specific attention of someone who has been doing this work for 6 years, and who knows that what they are documenting may matter enormously, and who does not yet know how it will matter, and is not going to speculate until the documentation is complete. The documentation takes 14 minutes. Then I open the file. The video is high definition, clear, well lit, the lighting of a room I know, the lighting of this laboratory from the angle of the camera in the southeast corner of the room, the camera angle that is also the angle of one of the 4 laboratory surveillance cameras. And the room in the video is this laboratory, and the workstation in the video is my workstation, and the person sitting at the workstation in the video is me. I am watching a video of myself sitting at my workstation in this laboratory, and the video is from 6 days ago, from a date 6 days prior to tonight. And I was in this laboratory 6 days ago on my night shift, and I was sitting at this workstation, and what the video shows is me, is my back, is the back of my chair, and my head and my hands on the keyboard. Exactly the view that the southeast corner camera would produce of someone sitting at this workstation, and the video is running, is playing at normal speed, and I am watching myself working at the workstation 6 days ago, and the video is 2.4 gigabytes, which is 20 minutes of footage, and I watched 20 minutes of footage of myself sitting at this workstation 6 days ago. 417 of those 20 minutes. The footage is exactly what the laboratory surveillance system would produce of a person working at a workstation, the routine of someone engaged in digital forensic examination, typing and clicking and leaning forward and sitting back, and the ordinary physical vocabulary of desk work. At 17 minutes and 43 seconds, in the footage, I watch myself stop typing. In the footage, I watch myself become still at the workstation with my hands on the desk and not on the keyboard and not moving, and the stillness lasts for 12 seconds. And then in the footage, I watch myself slowly turn my head to the right, which is the direction of the southeast corner camera, and I watch myself look directly into the camera, and the camera, which is the angle from which this video was taken, shows me my own face looking into it, and my face in the footage is the face I see in mirrors, is my face, and my face in the footage at 17 minutes and 55 seconds looks directly into the camera for 4 seconds, and then turns back to the workstation, and the hands go back to the keyboard, and the typing resumes, and at 20 minutes the footage ends. I sit at the workstation for a long time after the footage ends. I pull up the laboratory surveillance system. I pull up the recordings for the date shown in the footage metadata, 6 days ago, from the southeast corner camera, and I navigate to the time window shown in the footage, and I find the surveillance recording for that window, and I play it. And the surveillance recording shows the laboratory, shows my workstation, shows the back of my chair and my head and my hands. And at 17 minutes and 43 seconds of the surveillance recording, which corresponds to exactly the same moment in the recovered footage, I watch myself stop typing and become still. And at 17 minutes and 55 seconds, I watch myself turn my head to the right, toward the southeast corner camera, and look into it for 4 seconds, and then turn back and continue working. The surveillance system recorded exactly what the recovered footage recorded. The footage is a recording of what the surveillance camera captured on that date at that time in this room. The footage exists on the hard drive of a personal computer submitted in an investigation that has nothing to do with this laboratory and nothing to do with me. Collected from a location that is not this facility, from a person who has no connection to this facility, whose connection to this laboratory is not possible, whose possession of footage from this laboratory surveillance system is not possible, and who deleted the file 6 days ago, and whose deletion produced the recoverable fragment that my forensic tools surfaced tonight in the unallocated space of the drive. I document everything. I follow the rules. I document the file, the metadata, the recovery location, the file content, the comparison with the surveillance system recording, everything fully and precisely in the case documentation and in my personal log, and I flag the case for immediate supervisory review. And I call the duty supervisor at 2:47 in the morning and explain what I have found. And the duty supervisor comes to the laboratory and looks at what I have found, and the duty supervisor produces the silence followed by the rational explanation that I described at the beginning of this account, the explanation that neither of us believes, and the case is escalated to the investigative unit, and the investigative unit is looking into how footage from this laboratory surveillance system ended up on a personal computer that has no connection to this facility. And they have been looking for 6 weeks, and they have not found an explanation, and the camera in the southeast corner of this laboratory has been replaced, and the surveillance system has been audited for unauthorized access, and the audit found none, and the footage from 6 days ago still shows me turning to look at the camera at 17 minutes and 55 seconds. And I have looked at that moment 40 times, and I do not know why I turned to look at the camera. Do not remember the impulse or the decision. Do not remember what I was responding to when I turned my head to the right at 17 minutes and 55 seconds and looked directly into the southeast corner camera. And I sit at this workstation every night, and the southeast corner camera is to my right, and I do not look at it. I deliberately do not look at it, because I do not know what is in the camera angle. I do not know who or what is at the other end of the camera that made me turn to look at it 6 days ago. I do not know what I was looking at when I looked. And the investigation is ongoing, and I work the night shift, and I sit at this workstation, and I document everything. And I do not look at the southeast corner camera. And tonight, for the first time since the footage, I felt the impulse to turn and look, and I held it, and I kept working, and I am telling you this because the impulse to turn is back, and it is stronger than it was, and I am not going to turn, and I am not going to turn, and I am not going to turn.